The kettle screamed. Valerie didn't move. She stood in the kitchen, one hand wrapped around her ribs, the other pressing lightly on a swelling bruise near her temple. On the counter, a sealed manila envelope sat beneath a red ceramic mug. She'd found it by accident. Folded between bills and junk mail, right where Edward always dropped things he didn't want her to see, but was too arrogant to hide well. The envelope was stamped, "Confidential Oncology Results." She didn't open it. She tucked it between pages 148 and 149 of The Joy of Cooking, behind a recipe for chicken pot pie. She turned off the kettle, poured water, stirred honey into her tea with slow, measured movements. Her shoulder throbbed. Her mind did not. Voiceover, soft cold. He pushed me down the stairs when I asked about my savings. So I hid his cancer report. Let's see how long it takes him to come looking for it. Cut to black. 3 days earlier. It was raining. A thin, cold rain, the kind that seeped through jacket seams and coiled in the spine. Valerie stood in the kitchen folding laundry at the counter, the rhythmic motion of towels and socks more comforting than the news whispering low from the old radio. She glanced at the clock. Edward would be home soon. Like always, he'd stomp his shoes at the door, drop his keys too loudly into the bowl by the stairs, and ask what she made for dinner without saying hello. She didn't dread it. Not anymore. Now it felt like watching an old movie. Predictable. Outdated. He came in just like that. Shoes. Keys. Coat half off before the door even shut. "You used the good towels again," he said, peering toward the hallway. Valerie folded the last towel. "They're towels, Edward. They're meant to be used." "You know what I mean," he muttered, heading for the fridge. She followed. Slowly. Quietly. Her fingers grazed the counter as she passed. Bracing herself. "I need to ask you something," she said. Edward didn't look up. He popped open a beer, took a long swig. "What is it?" "The savings account," she said. "The one from my parents. You said we were setting it aside, that we were investing it for retirement." He let the silence hang. Like he hadn't heard her. Like maybe if he didn't answer, the question would dissolve. "We talked about this," he said finally. "We haven't." She met his eyes. "Not in years." He set the beer down with a thud, turned to face her fully. "Jesus, Val. What brought this on?" "I was just thinking," she said, her voice steady. "About the future. About bills. About the fact that I've never seen a statement." His mouth twisted into a smirk. "And you want what?" "A crash course in finance now." "I want to know where the money went," she said. "My father left us $213,000. Edward's eyes darkened. The casual mask slipped. His tone sharpened. "Your father left me the money, Val. You were too emotional to deal with any of it, remember?" She flinched. Not visibly, but inside, she felt something recoil. "That's not true," she said. "I trusted you. We were partners." Edward barked a laugh. "Partners? You haven't worked in 30 years. I ran this house," she snapped. "I gave up a career. A life. I cooked your meals and managed your calendar, and cared for your mother when she was dying." "Yeah, well, congratulations," he said, rolling his eyes. "You want a trophy?" "I want the truth," she said. "Show me the statements. Show me what you did with the money." He moved toward her fast. The air shifted. The sharp scent of his cologne, the stiffness in his jaw. All the old warning signs. She didn't move. Her chin lifted slightly, just enough to hold his gaze. Edward reached past her, toward the stairwell. "You're being ridiculous," he said. "You wouldn't even understand the accounts." "Then explain them to me," she said. He turned. Fast. Too fast. His shoulder bumped hers. Or maybe his hand grazed. Or maybe he shoved. The stairwell opened beneath her like a trap. She didn't scream. She gasped once. And then she fell. 10 wooden stairs. Her wrist caught the 4th. Her hip slammed the 6th. Her head hit the landing. The house went silent. She heard the fridge humming. And then the sound of Edward's voice. Calm. Controlled. She fell, he was saying on the phone. Just bruised. Clumsy as ever. He didn't take her to the hospital. He brought her an ice pack and reheated leftovers. That night, she slept sitting up in the living room chair. She could hear him watching television in the den, laughing, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, when he left for work, She limped upstairs, opened the drawer where he dropped the mail, sorted carefully. There, tucked between an insurance flyer and a hardware store coupon, was the envelope, his name on the front, stamped confidential. Valerie didn't open it. She walked to the kitchen, pulled down the Joy of Cooking from the top shelf, slid the envelope between its pages, and began to boil water. The bruise on her shoulder was already blooming, but her heartbeat was steady. For the first time in a long while, Valerie had something he didn't, and she intended to keep it that way. The days that followed were filled with silences sharper than screams. Valerie moved through the house like a ghost of herself, not cautious, aware. Aware of the creak in the third stair, the way Edward watched her from behind the rim of his coffee mug. How? He seemed more attentive now, more calculating. He thought she might press charges. He thought she might speak, but she didn't. She waited. And in her waiting, she started digging. The first place she looked was the fireproof box in the closet. The one where Edward kept passports, birth certificates, insurance documents. She found it unlocked. Inside were the standard papers, but also 2 bank statements, both in his name only. One had a balance she hadn't expected, low, much lower than she'd been told. The other was from a brokerage firm, a name she didn't recognize. She copied the account numbers in her address book, wrote them next to grocery lists and appliance model numbers so he'd never think to look. Later that week, while Edward watched a football game, she used his old laptop, the one he kept in the garage for email and online poker. She logged in under his username, the one she'd guessed months ago, a mix of their anniversary and his high school mascot. It worked. She sifted through emails, statements, a trail of transactions, hotel bookings, cash withdrawals, payments to names she didn't recognize. Not lovers, no. She didn't think he had the stamina for an affair. These were debts, habits, late-night trades, gambling sites masked as consulting firms. Valerie stared at the numbers. $213,000 gone. Not stolen. Squandered. The inheritance from her father, the fund they promised to use for travel, for retirement, for comfort. All of it fed into Edward's fear of irrelevance, into his fantasy of being a man who still controlled something. She printed what she could, hid it in the linen closet behind a stack of rarely used pillowcases. Then she called her sister. Clara hadn't visited in nearly 6 months. Edward hated company, said it disrupted his routines. But Clara came anyway. She brought soup, a thermos of coffee and a knitted shawl. "You look pale," Clara said, squinting at her. "And you're limping." Valerie said nothing. Clara watched her for a long time, then poured the soup. They sat in the sunroom, sipping in silence. Eventually Clara said, "I know that look. It's the one Mom had before she left Dad." Valerie smiled faintly. "Mom had fire." "So do you," Clara said. "You just keep it under lock and key." When Clara left, Valerie stood by the mailbox, holding a new batch of mail. Another envelope from the oncology clinic. Another opportunity. She opened it this time. Stage 2 pancreatic cancer. She folded the paper carefully, slid it into the pages of an old magazine, and placed the whole thing in the recycling bin beneath the sink. Not destroyed. Just misplaced. The next morning, Edward asked if she'd seen any letters from his doctor. "No," she said, buttering toast. "Did you check the junk pile?" He grunted. She set the plate in front of him. "Eat up. You look tired." He squinted at her. For a moment, she thought he knew. But he just nodded, picked up the toast. Valerie sipped her tea. Then she smiled, because she had seen the report. And he hadn't. The next envelope arrived in mid-November. Edward had gone out to the hardware store, claiming he needed a new part for the radiator. Valerie watched from the upstairs window until the car turned out of sight, then made her way to the kitchen, wincing with each step. The bruises on her hip were yellowing now, but the ache still lingered like a warning. She didn't go for the bills first. She knew the envelope by its weight. Not the flimsy kind that held advertisements or statements. Heavier. More personal. She held it for a long moment, her thumb running over the edge of the seal. Then she opened it. Inside was a second letter. Confirmation. Diagnosis. Stage 2 pancreatic cancer. An appointment had been scheduled for follow-up scans, along with the suggestion to begin chemotherapy immediately. She placed it on the counter. Read it again. And again. The world didn't tilt. It narrowed. Edward had cancer. And he didn't know. She tucked the envelope into her cardigan, walked to the den, and slipped it between two antique dictionaries on the bookshelf. She rearranged them so the crack in the spine wouldn't show. Then she made herself a cup of coffee. That evening he came home with paint thinner and a bag of nails. Said nothing about the mailbox. Asked what was for dinner. Roast chicken, she said. He grunted. Halfway through the meal he said, "You haven't seen any letters from the clinic, have you?" Valerie blinked, then shook her head. "Should I have?" "They said they mailed it," he muttered. "Maybe it got lost," she offered. "Post office is slow this time of year." He nodded but looked unconvinced. The next day, Valerie rearranged the medicine cabinet. Removed the antacids he took religiously. Moved his vitamins to a lower shelf, just to see if he noticed. He didn't. Over the next week she watched him change. Not dramatically, subtly. He napped more. Lost weight. The color drained from his face. She kept feeding him. Kept smiling. He began asking more questions. "Have you noticed if I've seemed tired? You think I'm just getting old? Maybe I should call the clinic again." Valerie would hum a non-answer, distract him with tea, or hand him the crossword. Every time he went out, she checked his phone. Deleted voicemails from the clinic. Marked unread emails as read. Changed reminder settings. She wasn't trying to kill him. Not actively. She was just curious. How long could he go without the truth? And would he finally ask for help if he believed no one was watching? One afternoon, she caught him staring at the floor. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I had a dream," he said. "You were talking to a doctor. But you weren't scared." She tilted her head. "Were you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." She touched his hand. "Don't worry, Edward. Everything's fine." That night, she pulled out the report again. Read it by candlelight. Memorized every word. And smiled. It started with small things. She moved the ibuprofen 2 shelves down. Replaced his multivitamin bottle with an older, expired one. Told him the mail hadn't come, even when it had. On laundry day, she left his socks damp in the drawer, knowing he hated that. On Wednesdays she made lentils, his least favorite, and insisted they were good for him. He grumbled, frowned, complained, but never suspected. Valerie kept smiling, serving, watching. Edward grew quieter, not because he noticed her, but because he noticed himself. The tiredness that wouldn't leave, the pain that hovered in his back, the days that blurred together like watercolor left in rain. "You sleep a lot," she said once. "You think I'm dying?" he asked. She touched his cheek. "Don't be dramatic." The game intensified. He began to question his memory. "Did I take my pills?" "I left them on the table," she'd say. He hadn't. The pills never left the bottle. He'd stare at the bottle, then at her, then back down confused. She'd smile. "You're just tired." And he was. She let the voicemail blink on the landline for 3 days. When he finally played it, the doctor's voice was half cut off. Something about blood tests. Something about concern. "I must have deleted it by accident," Valerie said, shrugging. "You know me. Clumsy with buttons." Edward stared at the phone, then at her. She tilted her head. "Would you like some tea?" He nodded. Slowly. Every day, she wrote notes in a journal. Not dramatic entries. Just observations. Tuesday, he forgot the kettle was on. Burned the pot. Didn't apologize. Blamed the kettle. Wednesday, asked for help standing up. First time. Thursday, woke up sweating. Cried in the bathroom. I listened from the hallway. She wasn't keeping score. She was documenting. Because for the first time in her life, she was witnessing a man become smaller than the world he once controlled. He started calling her dear again. It wasn't affection. It was dependence. She dressed him some mornings. Other mornings she let him struggle. He began asking to go to the doctor again. "Something's not right," he said. She pretended to call. Left the receiver off for a few seconds. Then nodded solemnly. "Appointments next week," she said. It wasn't. He forgot the date by the next morning. And she let him. He once asked, "Do you think I'm being punished?" She didn't answer. He asked again. She said, "Maybe." Maybe this is what it feels like when your body remembers what your conscience forgot. He didn't reply. One night, he coughed so hard he dropped his glass. She swept it up without a word. That same night, she took the cancer report from the bookshelf, placed it inside a cookbook, and left it on the kitchen table. A test. He never opened it. By the end of the month, Edward was a shell. No longer angry. Just hollow. She cooked. She cleaned. She kissed his forehead. He thanked her. And every time he said thank you, she felt a little more powerful. Not out of cruelty. Out of justice. Because this silence, this was what 30 years of dismissal had bought him. And what 30 days of patience had earned her. She was no longer his wife. She was his reckoning. It was the sound of the wind chimes that made her turn. The back door had been left ajar, the breeze carrying in a chill and the faint scent of jasmine. Valerie wrapped her cardigan tighter around her and stepped onto the porch. Clara stood at the edge of the garden path, holding a thermos and wearing a look Valerie hadn't seen since their mother's funeral. Concern, thinly veiled as casual cheer. Figured you'd be up early, Clara said. Mind if I come in? Valerie hesitated, then nodded. Inside, Clara poured the coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. She eyed the worn kitchen, the labeled jars, the old tiled counters, the cookbook with a slight bulge in its spine. So Clara said, sitting. You look well. Considering. Considering what? Valerie asked. Clara didn't answer immediately. She just sipped. I talked to Dr. Elwood last week, she said finally. Ran into him at the clinic. He asked how Edward was doing. Valerie's hand tightened around the mug. He said he hadn't heard from him. That the follow-up was missed. Twice. Valerie set the mug down. He's been tired. Forgetful. Clara tilted her head. He's been sick, Val. Valerie said nothing. You found the report, didn't you? It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A shared knowing between sisters who'd lived through too much not to read the spaces between silence. Valerie nodded. Clara sat back. And you haven't told him. I'm not hiding it, Valerie said quietly. I just haven't handed it to him. That's hiding, Val. I'm not ready. Not ready for what? His reaction. No. Not ready to give back what I finally took. Clara stared. Valerie leaned forward. You know what he said when I asked about my inheritance? He told me I'd never worked a day in my life. He said the money was his. I know, Clara whispered. He pushed me down the stairs. Clara's eyes widened. He didn't trip me. He didn't fumble. He pushed me. The room filled with stillness. I didn't go to the hospital, Valerie said. I bandaged myself. I kept quiet. I made dinner that night. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. And when I found the report, Valerie continued, when I saw the word cancer in bold ink, I felt nothing. Not pity. Not fear. Just stillness. Clara reached across the table. Val, what are you doing? Valerie took a deep breath. I'm watching. Watching what? How long it takes him to come looking for what he's already lost. Clara looked down. This isn't justice, she said. No, Valerie agreed. It's reflection. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Clara said, you don't have to stay. You could leave. Come with me. We'll figure something out. Valerie shook her head. I'm not leaving, she said. I'm finishing. Clara stood. If you need me, I'm a call away. Valerie smiled. I know. When she was alone again, Valerie returned to the den. Edward was still asleep in his recliner. She looked at him, at the man who once commanded every room, who now sagged into the cushions like a shadow. She sat across from him, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. She felt equal. The first sign came on a Thursday. Edward stood in the hallway, staring at a light switch as if he'd forgotten what it did. He touched it, flicked it off, then on again, then off, like testing the reality of it. When he turned and saw Valerie watching, he didn't speak. Do you need something? She asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head. That evening she made stew, his favorite, heavy with rosemary and barley, and he barely touched it. He picked at the bread, broke it apart in his fingers, but didn't eat. You should eat, she said, her tone gentle. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten properly in days. Nothing tastes right. He stared into the bowl like he could force it to make sense. Then he looked up at her. Do you think I'm dying? She didn't blink. I think you're tired, she said. And your body is catching up with everything you ignored. He flinched slightly. That night, she heard him cry in the bathroom. Not loud sobs, just quiet hiccups. The kind of grief that sneaks out through old cracks. In the following days, he began to soften. He asked her if she wanted to watch a movie, if she needed help folding laundry. He tried to carry in groceries. She let him. The shift was gradual, but obvious. He was trying to become likable. Too late. She let him have his gestures. Let him believe they meant something. But she saw through him now. Saw the way he flinched at silence. The way he paused at doorways as if remembering an old bruise. He'd never asked her how she felt about the stairs. About the fall. Now he asked her if she was cold. You never asked before, she said one day. I never saw the need, he admitted. She nodded. I noticed. She began dressing a little more freely around the house. A silk scarf. A red lipstick. He noticed. Stared. Asked. Where are you going? Nowhere, she said. It made him nervous. Why the lipstick then? Because I can. He didn't argue. The balance had tilted. He no longer spoke with authority. He asked questions. He hovered at the edge of her decisions. He waited to be invited into rooms he once stormed through. He'd lost the thread. And she held the spool. When he slept, she moved through the house freely. She listened to old music. She read books in the sunlight. She started writing again. Letters mostly. One to Clara. One to herself. And one to Edward. She didn't know if she'd give it to him. But she wrote it anyway. In it, she said, I was never yours to break. You just assumed I wouldn't notice the cracks. You taught me how to disappear. And I let you. But I'm back now. And I'm not here to save you. Edward's condition worsened. He grew quieter. He asked fewer questions. He looked at her like a compass he'd forgotten how to read. One day he found the envelope. The real one. The first report. Tucked in a book he opened by mistake. She was in the garden when he stepped outside, paper in hand. You knew, he said. She looked up from the soil. I did. His hand trembled. Why didn't you tell me? She dusted her palms. Would it have changed anything? He looked lost. Pale. Small. I could have started treatment sooner. She stood. You could have started treating me like a person years ago. He lowered the paper. I'm sorry, he said. She met his eyes. I know. He waited for something more. She turned back to the dirt. And said nothing else. The storm came on a Friday. Not rain. Not wind. But something darker. A pressure in the house. A silence that didn't feel empty, but waiting. Edward was standing in the kitchen when she walked in from the garden. He held the report in his hand again, not folded this time, not hidden. Just gripped tightly, like a weapon. You knew, he said again. Yes, she said calmly. You watched me lose weight, forget things, fall apart, and you said nothing. Valerie set down the basket of herbs. I didn't need to say anything. He slammed the paper on the counter. What the hell is wrong with you? She didn't flinch. You pushed me down a flight of stairs when I asked about my own savings, she said. What's wrong with me is that I survived it. His face turned red. That was an accident. You pushed me, she repeated, voice steady. You didn't like that I asked questions. That I wanted answers. I panicked. You reacted, she corrected. The same way you always react when someone dares to challenge your control. He stepped forward. Not fast, but with that familiar posture. Shoulders lifted, chest puffed, the old Edward, trying to surface. But he wasn't the same man anymore. She wasn't the same woman. She didn't back away. You lied to me for years, she continued. About the money. About everything. And now? You want sympathy? I want honesty, he said through clenched teeth. She laughed. It was quiet. Joyless. You want honesty? You spent our retirement at casinos. You borrowed against our mortgage. You drained my father's inheritance. He opened his mouth. She raised her hand. You don't get to talk. Not right now. He stared. Rage swelling. Fear flickering just beneath it. You made me small, she said. So small I stopped hearing my own thoughts. But I'm not small anymore, Edward. I'm awake. And I'm not afraid. The room felt like a matchstick, one breath from fire. You let me get sick, he said, voice shaking. She nodded. And you let me bleed on the floor while you called your poker buddy instead of 911. He blinked. She walked past him. Where are you going? He snapped. To get some air, she said. This house stinks of old ghosts. As she reached the front door, he shouted. I could still report you. What you did, hiding that report, it's illegal. She turned calm as dawn. And what would you tell them? That your wife didn't tell you something you could have found yourself? That she fed you, clothed you, bathed you, and quietly let you feel what it's like to be invisible? He looked away. She opened the door. I didn't need revenge, Edward. I just needed the truth to sit with you for a while. Alone. Then she left. Not slamming the door. Just closing it. Edward died in the chair by the window. Not dramatically. Not loudly. The morning light had just crept past the hedges when Valerie found him. Head tilted slightly, eyes closed. The report he'd once raged over still folded neatly on his lap. She stood there for a long time. No gasps. No sobs. Just the clock ticking. Then she took the blanket from the couch and laid it gently across his chest. She boiled water, made tea, called Clara. I think he's gone, she said. Her voice was calm, clear. Clara came with the hospice nurse. There had been a plan in place, vague, unofficial, but assumed. They'd known, the three of them, even without speaking it out loud. The nurse pronounced him. Asked about arrangements. No funeral, Valerie said. He didn't want one. She didn't wait for Clara to agree. She knew it wouldn't be challenged. She signed the paperwork, answered the necessary questions, watched as they took him from the house that had swallowed her for 3 decades and finally spat her out intact. That night, she slept better than she had in years. No dreams. Just quiet. In the days that followed, there were no condolences to accept. No neighbors came knocking. Edward hadn't left behind mourners. Just debts. Just silence. Valerie moved through the house differently now. She opened windows, rearranged furniture, took down the heavy drapes, painted the entryway a soft green. The cancer report? She burned it. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. I don't need this anymore, she whispered, feeding the pages to the flames. She found more than paper in those drawers. Love letters, not hers. Receipts. Legal documents she didn't recognize. And photos. Photos of her. Young. Smiling. Before. She didn't cry. She put them in a box. Labeled it. Then. And sealed it shut. One afternoon, she walked into the bedroom and found the old wedding album. She paused. Then flipped it open. Page by page. Black and white, soft focus smiles, lace and promises. When she reached the end, she closed the book and set it beside the fireplace. She didn't burn that one. But she didn't open it again. She started going into town more. Coffee at the library. Visits with Clara. Walks with neighbors she'd only ever waved to before. She bought new shoes. Bright ones. One morning, she woke up and didn't reach for the second pillow. She smiled. The death certificate arrived by mail. She filed it away. Then she opened a new bank account. Her name only. That week, she sent in the deed transfer papers. The house was hers now fully. Not because she claimed it, but because he'd left it unguarded. In the garden, she planted rosemary, then lavender, then something wild. She liked the wild ones best. They didn't ask permission to grow. And neither would she again. Peace, Valerie discovered, is not a place. It is not silence, though it often arrives in silence. It is a kind of knowing, a steady heartbeat that no longer skips when memories flash or when footsteps echo. It is waking up and not needing to brace. Weeks passed. Then a month. Valerie's mornings became ritual. Lemon water, open windows, bare feet on the floorboards. She let the sun touch her skin before any voice touched her ears. The air in the house no longer held tension. It had a softness now, like a held breath finally released. One morning she walked to the garden with scissors in hand. She clipped lavender and rosemary, binding them in a cotton ribbon. Clara arrived with tea and questions. They sat outside and spoke of things small and large, but mostly, they spoke of tomorrow. I'm thinking of traveling, Valerie said one afternoon. Where? Clara asked. Somewhere warm. Coastal. With color. You're allowed, Clara smiled. She was. More than allowed. She was owed 1,000 moments of joy. Sometimes Valerie read the news. Sometimes she ignored it. She relearned the sound of her own laughter. A little raspy at first, but true. She took long walks without explanation. She bought a blue hat she didn't need. The weight she carried all those years hadn't vanished, but it had settled into something manageable, something known. She wore it like an old coat, not always flattering, but hers. At night, she lit candles not for ambience but for remembrance. Not of Edward, but of herself, the girl she'd been, the woman she had become, the one who had lived, quietly, through grief and control and indignity, and had emerged not unscarred, but unruined. She didn't regret not telling Edward sooner. Not anymore. She didn't relive the fall, or the words he'd thrown like knives. She accepted that her silence had been both shield and sword. Forgiveness never came like thunder. It came like fog. Slow. Inevitable. Not of him, but of herself. She forgave herself for waiting so long, for loving so deeply, for becoming invisible. She forgave herself for surviving. One evening, a neighbor asked her to join a book club. She said yes. Another day, a local artist asked if she wanted to model hands for a sculpture. She held out her palms. "They've held too much," she said. "They might be perfect." And they were. Years later, someone asked her if she'd ever been married. Yes, she said. What was he like? She thought for a moment. Necessary. They didn't ask what she meant. She didn't explain. Because peace doesn't need explaining. And neither did she.